warnings were heard telling the protesters, you must disperse, you must disperse. We're not sure if this gas is coming from authorities. It seems pretty obvious that may be the case, as some of these protesters are pouring water in their eyes, I'm sure burning from that huge plume of gas or tear gas, we're assuming, that you see there in the back of the shot. As many as 15 protesters have been arrested already. These people are at the G20 to, in their words, or at least according to some who are participating, to disrupt the meeting of the world's leaders, the top 20 leaders in the world, including President Barack Obama, who's expected to land there about 3:30 Eastern time. Again, these images are coming in from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where the G20 summit will take place over the next 2 days. And one side of the screen, I believe, is tape, where you see the gas there, tear gas, we're assuming, that was released by authorities to disperse or make the protesters break up. We saw a video earlier. They were marching what seemed to be just a usual kind of calm protest down the street, and at some point within the last few minutes, this chaos erupted there. This is very different than the protest that we saw with the G20 in London, as we were seeing pictures of bloody protesters, and they were breaking out windows of banks and targeting businesses. But now we're seeing this perhaps heat up here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where it looks like these people are actually in the rear of homes or buildings there. But that tape you see on the side of your screen where the people were running, this happening just a short time ago, and we're trying to get more details. I believe Allison Cardival should be on the phone with us here shortly to find out exactly what happened. In the minutes that we were listening to Hugo Chavez, the president of Venezuela, he was talking to the UN General Assembly, we got word in that there had been some kind of event or confrontation in Pittsburgh, and this is the video that's coming in to us. Again, we have Nora. I think we've worked out our technical issues with my colleague Nora O'Donnell, who's hosting these 2 hours with me. Nora, what are you hearing now?
That's right, Tamara. And the reason we can show you these live pictures right now is we actually have a live view camera, which is walking with the protesters as they march there in Pittsburgh. So that's why we have these live pictures that you can see what's going on and why there's been that large amount of gas, and we can show you as they move along here. It is important to point out that Allison Cardival is in Pittsburgh, is filing reports for us. We are hearing that police have now brought out their riot gear at 16th and Penn to stop these protesters from marching. And there you see it, that large amount of smoke right there. That is a big concern in Pittsburgh, as the President of the United States, Barack Obama, is there along with the G20 leaders. The First Lady of the United States is there as well. And you can see a lot of protesters and quite a scene going on there, Tamron.
Yeah, and the estimates, Nora, were around several hundred protesters were expected for 2 days. They had banners like "No bailout, no capitalism." These activists coming from all across the country, perhaps even from different parts of the world here to, in some cases, as they put it, disrupt the G20. The president is expected to land in about 6 minutes from now. The area in which he is to travel to speak to the members of the G20, heavily secured, heavily guarded, so the protesters are not able to get near the president as the World Organization gathers to talk about the issues facing the global economy. But as you mentioned now, Nora, we can hear car alarms going off, and these people are kind of running back and forth around here. We've not seen any of these, the police in riot gear. We often will see, Nora, them kind of line up in this intimidating formation, but at least the vantage point that our cameras have right now, you just kind of see a hodgepodge of people running with flags and carry on in a chaotic manner.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out, too, Tamron, that they have largely tried to sequester a lot of these protesters, and there are hundreds of them, not thousands, hundreds of them in this Arsenal Park, so that they don't get near the summit area, don't get near some of where the world leaders are. They're certainly trying to march that way, but you can see the riot police there using these annoying sirens, right, to sort of back these protesters up in some of the gas to try and get them to disperse. And it is unique that we have this camera camera view of these protesters as they try and get their voices heard on some of these issues, but they are indeed sort of sequestered from where many of the leaders are gathering for this important G20 summit. And as you point out, Cameron, the president is expected soon, right?
Yeah, we're understanding now. I'm just getting word that Air Force One is there. It is video there. Air Force One landing, and as you point out, Nora, they've got riot fences that have lined the sidewalks, helicopters, gunboats, Humvees. They've pulled out obviously an arsenal of equipment and individuals to protect those world leaders there and to keep them, as you pointed out, away from the protesters. City officials also announced, according to reports, that they've got 1,000 jail cells ready for any lawbreakers. And these protesters are not from one organization. It's a series of different organizations, all kind of together. So that's why you will see banners that say different things, but they're all there, obviously, because of the G20. And you see the video on the side of your screen, President Obama just landing there. I'm not sure if these people nor are reacting or trying to maybe drum up their anger, knowing that the president is close to landing or would be close to landing, and perhaps to get attention to their cause and to their protest, because it has been, quite honestly, pretty quiet throughout the day.
Yeah, and you know, I guess they're calling themselves, I mean, it is some different groups that are gathered in this park, but these G20 resistance projects protesters who are talking about dissent against the establishment is sort of their beef and why they're there.
Right. But there are also even Buddhist monks, apparently, who are among those protesting, Nora. So a hodgepodge of people there. We're going to go to a quick break. The president has landed for the G20 summit in Pittsburgh. Protesters are now being confronted by riot police. We're going to be right back after a quick break to get you caught up on all of the events happening out of Pittsburgh. Welcome back. We're following breaking news right now to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We've got two screens up for you because Air Force One taxiing, the president just landing for the G20 summit. On the other side of your screen is well, we're watching a confrontation between protesters and authorities there on the scene. This is the first sign of, we don't want to make too much of this because there's said to be several hundred protesters, but there was some type of confrontation between the protesters you see there and authorities there on the scene. Earlier, about 15 people had been arrested, protesters there, and right now we're trying to get more information on exactly what happened here, what caused this confrontation between the protesters and the authorities. What you hear there also, that siren in the background, is it's called a long acoustic device, long-range acoustic device, and it's designed to, quote, bring the protesters to their knees. It's supposed to be a deterrent to break up any large gathering of people of this such. We also saw tear gas and a number of those protesters pouring water in their eyes. And now my colleague Nora O'Donnell is still here with me, and we're watching as some large Humvees make their way through to kind of break up this latest, but what appears to be a relatively small confrontation between authorities. We're going to keep an eye on this situation and bring you the very latest on what's happening in Pittsburgh as the President of the United States has landed there for the G20 summit. Nora.
Yeah, I mean, just as the sun comes up every morning, you can expect these types of protesters at some sort of world summit like this. They show up all the time in order to get their voices heard. I think, relatively speaking, this is a pretty small protest, given that it's in the hundreds, and it's kind of a ragtag band of people with a lot of smoke, and they're trying to push them back. But important, also, as you
Nora, I want to point out, it looks like the president will be getting off of Air Force One here shortly, and you pointed out that it's a small group of people. It's nothing like we saw when the G20 was in London, and we saw those images of people and the authorities and police in riot gear, and it was some pretty volatile confrontation. We're not seeing that. We are seeing the, at least first, what appears to be images of a little chaos between the police and the protesters. We're going to monitor these pictures and bring our audience the very latest, Nora.
All right, and we'll continue also to keep up that picture of Air Force One as we're expecting the president.
A confrontation between riot police and protesters in Pittsburgh, where the G20 summit is happening. The president just landing there. These are live pictures right now. You see the riot police getting off of that school bus. Let's go to NBC's John Yang. He's live in Pittsburgh to tell us more about what's going on here. So, John, we're getting information that these people may have been unlawfully assembling, and that is why they had a confrontation with police.
Well, Tamara, the goal here was not to apply for a permit. The idea was to have an unpermitted gathering here at Arsenal Park in the Lawrenceville neighborhood of Pittsburgh, and then try to march to the convention center where the summit's being held about 2.5 miles southwest of here. They said that if they were to seek a government permit, a city permit for this demonstration, that would make the demonstration state sanctioned. And so they wanted to show that, to exercise what they said were their rights to the streets, to use the streets to raise their voices and their right to free speech. What's happened so far is that about 6 blocks away from here, the police told them to disperse, told them this was an unlawful march, and told them to disperse. They did sort of break apart. They weren't stopped walking in a single column toward downtown, and then went sort of along side streets into alleyways. There was, we're told by our NBC colleagues along the route that there was some tear gas used, but this is in a very small neighborhood, an entertainment district of Pittsburgh called the Strip. A very isolated incident still about 20 blocks away from where the summit's being held, Tamara.
All right, John, thank you very much for the update on that breaking news. Thank you, John.
And it's time for Making Their Case.
Afternoon, a tense scene at the G20 World Economic Summit. Police ordered hundreds of protesters to stop their march protesting the G20 summit. Police in riot gear appeared to use what we believe may be tear gas to disperse that crowd. The march is not sanctioned by the city, and police declared it an unlawful assembly. It is the first of 2 days of marches planned by the Pittsburgh G20 Resistance Project. The protests come as President Obama is expected to arrive shortly at his hotel in Pittsburgh any minute now for the two-day meeting of world leaders. About a half hour ago, the president touched down in Pittsburgh. His meetings with the world's most powerful leaders come as the global economy is improving. The leaders will work on ways to prevent new financial meltdowns. CNBC's chief Washington correspondent John Harwood joins us now. So, John, what is at the heart of this meeting? I know we can talk in broad context of fixing the global economy, but specifically here, what is the goal for this president?
Well, basically what President Obama is trying to use this Pittsburgh meeting for is to gather world leaders and say, we did the right thing in April when we gathered in London. We stimulated the economy. We put a bunch of money into international financial institutions, and that's why the economy in the United States, by the testimony of Fed Chairman Bernanke and others, is beginning to turn around. We've got to keep that going. They're also going to make the case, Tamara, that now is not the time. It's too fragile. Look at the unemployment rate in the United States, 9.7%. Too fragile to begin withdrawing those supports, that federal help, that assistance from Washington to the economy, and try to get a consensus on that for leaders around the world. At the same time, they work on things like financial regulation, including some limits or new incentives on executive compensation.
And, John, we've been watching some of the protests already happening. A couple of people, about 15, have been arrested, and we watched a confrontation between riot police and protesters there. Tell us a little bit, I mean, on your way in, what was the scene there? It's far different, obviously, John, than what we saw in London, when we saw some pretty violent confrontations between protesters and police.
Well, it has been a tamer scene than London was, and I have to confess, Tamara, and I walked in here with my producer at 5 o'clock in the morning. There was nobody on the streets. Nothing had started then. I've been inside the security perimeter ever since, but there were marchers, protesters against globalization. There were environmental protesters who did not get the permits that the city requires for marches like that, and that's why you saw the clashes. And it's a repeat of what we saw, 10 years ago in Seattle when international officials gathered for a trade conference. You saw violence on the streets there. This is pretty low-key compared to that. We'll see what develops over the next 24 hours. Right. But this kind of clash is why they've got police out by the platoons to try to secure the city.
All right, John, thank you very much.